Welcome to The Good Oil. I'm Bassam Hallak, and this podcast explores all things omega-3, especially the science, made simply and easy to understand. Whether you're passionate about omega-3 or simply curious that there is an impact on future health, The Good Oil brings you with the insights you're looking for. We're joined by two incredible guests from GOED, the global organisation for EPA and DHA, Ellen Schutt, Managing Director, who leads global industry efforts, and Kaitlin Roke, Director of Scientific Communication, who explores and makes complex research accessible for consumers and business. Today, we're focusing on sustainability and the future of omega-3, what it means for the industry, how our companies are innovating, and how consumers can make more informed, eco-conscious choices. So let's get into it. So, Ellen, one of the most pressing issues today is sustainability. And it's not just the omega-3 industry, it's almost every industry. How has the omega-3 industry, how has GOED been very proactive in promoting sustainability in the omega-3 space?
Well, I think GOED's role is one of communication because it's really what our members have to do. And they're the ones that are in the front lines of being able to understand what they need to do to have a sustainable or an environmentally sound business plan. And obviously this is important. It's important everywhere in the world, but it's driven a lot by Europe and the European regulations that are coming up about sustainability and what you need to do to make sure you're following a triple bottom line. So I think our industry is very aware of this needing to be the role of their companies in the future. And it's of course, many of our companies are involved in the oceans. So there's the ocean part of it, but there's also the social and governance and all the other parts of the ESG world that are important for all of the companies going forward.
And sustainability is such a critical factor, which we just talked about, especially with the growing awareness of environmental impacts. So from an industry perspective, what complexities do companies face in sourcing responsibly? And how are they rethinking their approach to environmental impacts?
I think there's a misconception about overfishing and its connection to omega-3 fisheries because the reality is there really isn't a connection. Yeah. I'm not saying there's not overfishing issues in the world, but if you look at the fisheries that supply the omega-3 industry, they have a certification that shows that they're being managed sustainably. They're a byproduct of the seafood industry, like tuna as an example. The Peruvian anchovy fishery I mentioned in an earlier episode is the largest fishery that supplies the industry. They closed their fishery in 2023 because there were too many juveniles, and they want to make sure that they're protecting the future of that fishery. So the omega-3 fisheries are very aware of the fact that they need to take care of their biomass and their fish to make sure that they're still there in the future. And so I think that's a message that doesn't get out often enough, and it's something I really want to emphasize.
Yeah. And Ellen, GOED are actually actively working with other bodies, like you just came back from Japan for the IFO conference.
Yes.
So could you just talk us about how you're sort of integrating yourself with all those bodies to making sure that the messaging is right and how sustainability is part of that discussion?
Yeah, we talk a lot at GOED and within our board of directors about sustainability in terms of planetary sustainability, but also sustainability of the omega-3 industry. Yeah. And so if we're going to have a sustainable industry in the future and be able to make sure everyone has enough EPA and DHA, there needs to be more sources. There needs to be education about the importance of other EPA and DHA sources. Yeah. For example, I met last week in Japan at the meeting you mentioned with a few of our Omani members who are new members to GOED, and they have a sardine oil that is something that could be a future oil for omega-3s. And it's just a matter of making sure we're doing the due diligence on these other sources and educating our members and the ultimate consumer about these. Because if we want a good, sustainable, from an industry and a planetary perspective in the future, we need to make sure we're inclusive of many different sources, more than are in existence today.
Yeah, it's great, fantastic. And so looking forward into the future, what areas of innovation or market expansion do you see driving the next wave of growth in omega-3 demand from a consumer perspective?
I don't know. That's a hard one. It's one of the things that we think is a little bit of a weakness in the category, that there needs to be more innovation in, Kaitlin mentioned in an earlier episode that there's so many different omega-3 choices, and how do you stand out? So it all has to come back to the science and telling the story of the importance of EPA and DHA for whatever your product proposition is. But it's hard to be innovative in a crowded category. So I think it's actually a little bit of an issue, and I'm not sure I don't have a good answer.
No, but I think you raise a good point, right, Kaitlin, in terms of the research is actually driving the trend, the consumer trend, because the consumers obviously wanted to know what's best for them, and research is giving them the next frontier in terms of how much to take. So you talk about prenatal. It used to be take omega-3 when you're pregnant. Now you need to take as much as 800 milligrams a day, right? So that's changed a lot.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about these different categories, as we said at GOED, there's 4 main categories we focus on. And kind of conversationally, what I think is part of the challenge is that when we're thinking about a topic like heart health, a younger consumer is like, well, I'm fine. I don't need to worry about my heart health right now. But that's, I think, a concern because sometimes people want to see the effects right away. So for example, sometimes people give omega-3s to their pets because it's supposed to help with a nice shiny coat for your dog. So people think, oh, I'm going to take omega-3s for my hair because I want nice shiny hair. People want to know in 3 to 4 weeks, am I going to have as nice hair as my dog does? And I know this sounds silly, but people want these kind of short-term, visible effects. So when you take omega-3s for your heart, your little Grinch heart isn't necessarily popping out of your chest to say, I feel really good with these omega-3s. It might be years and years before you notice an effect, or you might not. Yeah. If you get your blood lipids tested, you might notice triglyceride lowering, which is one of the heart health benefits, or you might notice a reduction in blood pressure. So there are some ways people can measure a benefit for their heart health. A healthy consumer might not see as drastic of a change in those effects as someone who's trying to manage some heart health outcomes. But I think we want to encourage people that, to start increasing their intake as soon as they can. But it's not like, oh, I didn't start in my 20s, so now I'm in my 80s, I better not. There's no time limit. Yeah. They're helpful across the life cycle. So we want to make sure that people are thinking about taking them at all stages of their life, throughout their life.
Yeah. So just circling back to the sustainability, how are alternative sources like algal or algae, I should say, and fermentation reshaping the sustainability conversation around omega-3?
That's an interesting question. So algae has become very much a conversation at the consumer level. Yeah. It became a bigger conversation within the industry in 2023 when I mentioned that the Peruvian anchovy fishery closed their fishing season, so there wasn't as much EPA and DHA available. Algae is still a very, very small part of the whole industry. We think it has huge potential because it's ultimately scalable because you don't need fish in the ocean. In terms of sustainability, you can say, of course, algae is more sustainable if you're looking at fish in the ocean, but there's a land-based expense to algae too. So, correct, yeah. So our message about sustainability is all sources are sustainable if managed properly. And we are right now doing a life cycle assessment white paper. We're not doing a life cycle assessment of any fishery or any algae facility, but we're doing a white paper to help our members and to help consumers understand what a good life cycle assessment looks like, because we hear too much of my source is more sustainable than yours, and we want there to be enough for everybody, and we want our members and consumers to understand that there are all sustainable choices, and there's just some trade-offs at every level.
That's great. And I'm assuming that the life cycle assessment that you're doing, will that be put in a form that you could share with consumers as well in the future? Is that something they could look at?
We think so. We're waiting to see what it looks like first. It should be done in the next couple months. So once we've seen it, we'd have to probably do a more consumer-friendly version of it. But it makes sense to make sure that the consumers also understand this. We're also talking about at GOED doing almost an omega-3 position paper on sustainability, because I mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of connection between overfishing and omega-3 fisheries, which is not the case. So we need to have a statement out there that says, here's what the reality is of the sustainability of the omega-3 industry for consumers in a peer-reviewed journal, that they can understand that this is an independent analysis of what's going on in the omega-3 world.
And Kaitlin, from a communication role, what's one major obstacle to making omega-3 more mainstream, and how is the industry helping bridge that gap for everyday consumers?
Yeah, I think as Ellen was saying, there's a lot of misconceptions around the sustainability of fish oil and omega-3s, and part of that is, an algae product and a fish oil product might actually be equivalent sustainability-wise, but the algae is green, so people think, oh, green plants, better for the environment. But both of them require really important management and resource care, and both products actually might be a really sustainable choice. So when we're thinking about communicating to consumers, as we've talked about earlier, omega-3 and EPA and DHA are a lot of levels down. So I think helping people know that we're looking for EPA and DHA, we're looking for omega-3s, we're hoping to increase more of these in our diet through foods or supplements. So it's kind of a language thing. So people know about fish oil. Do they also know that algae is a source of EPA and DHA? So there's some education and communication that we have to continue to have with consumers so that they feel good about choosing a product. But it's difficult. There's a lot of things on people's minds. There's a lot of nutrients, a lot of dietary considerations. So yeah, we want to keep omega-3s top of mind for people because they are so important, and most people aren't getting enough.
It's really been insightful having you both on today. But before we wrap up, what is one thing you'd like listeners to take away from today's conversation about omega-3, the science and the future of the omega-3 industry? So maybe you, the industry, and yourself is the science.
Okay.
Start with you, maybe. Ellen.
My answer is kind of a science and industry answer because if we go back to our very first conversation in the very first episode, it was about the fact that omega-3s are a foundational nutrient.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. When we talk about how crowded the store shelves are and we have to compete with the latest nutrient fad of the moment, the message needs to be, this is in every cell of your body. You need this to be healthy throughout your entire life. It's good for so many different reasons. And EPA and DHA is something that we want every consumer to have in their diet throughout their life.
Yeah, and of course I agree with that. And I think what we like to say sometimes, or what I like to say, is that some is good and more is better. So even having some in your diet is great, but if you can find products or foods or supplements that have more, that's going to be a really good move for your health too. So that's kind of the consumer side. And then, from a science side, we have 4 really strong areas of science, but we see a lot of innovation and expansion in different areas. You have mentioned Dr. Gregory Peoples being a guest, and I haven't talked a lot about the exercise research, but there's some really promising work there. It's really exciting. We're going to learn a lot more in the next few years as these new studies come out. And then I think as things evolve, we've touched on personalizing, and maybe it's not personalizing in a super techie way, but we're going to learn more about different, let's say, brain health outcomes. Someone who has anxiety versus someone who has depression versus someone who's dealing with cognitive decline in older adulthood. There might be ways that we can support these individuals with different doses or different ratios of EPA and DHA, and we're not quite there yet. So we're really excited about the research to come and how new research is going to really invigorate and support this category moving forward.
Amazing.
That was a really good answer.
Well, thank you so much both for sharing your expertise, and I really enjoyed this podcast. So it's been a pleasure discussing the exciting developments of Omega-3. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about GOED and stay up to date with all the great work they do, check out their website and follow them on social media, which is, Ellen?
AlwaysOmega3s.com and fatsoflife.com for the practitioners.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of The Good Oil. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. Until next time, keep your omega-3s up and take care.
You're listening to The Good Oil, where better health lies.